Hi, dear listeners, and welcome back to Blush and Bloom, the podcast where we talk about women's health, self care, and everything in between. I'm your host, Gigi, founder of Asale, your space for cycle aware and preventive care. I'm really glad you're here with me on this journey to unpack women's health and highlight the incredible things being built in this space. So, let's get into today's episode. All right. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me on the Blush of Bloom podcast. So, for someone who's meeting for the very first time, who is Rebecca, and how would you describe the work that you do in women's health?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest. I'm very honoured and grateful to be involved. I'm Rebekah Lloyd. It's kind of hard to sum it up in one line because I feel like I've had a pretty varied path to get to where I am. But in a nutshell, I'm the founder of Rela Health, which is a consultancy working with primarily women's health innovators and brands, but also across health tech and med tech on all things strategic advisory and marketing consulting, helping anyone who's really looking to launch a new product, maybe is in the early stages of trying to figure out how they're going to go to market with their idea, essentially helping people to bring their innovations to reality and actually turning that innovation into real impact. So yeah, I've done that for a while, and I've worked in healthcare for over 15 years. I've worked in the NHS, I've worked in pharmaceuticals, I've spoken in Parliament, I've hosted conferences and had my own podcast. I've done various different things, but I'm super passionate about women's health. I know that's why we originally connected. So yeah, I'm just really grateful to be a part of this conversation and to have the opportunity to dive into some juicy conversation.
Juicy. Okay, so your journey into this space began with your personal experience. So can you tell us a bit more about living with chronic pain and receiving a delayed endometriosis diagnosis? Like, what did that teach you? How did it shape your path?
Yeah, so I mean, it's crazy to think, but it took me about 10 years to get my diagnosis of endometriosis. So at the time, I was working for London marketing agency. So I was running the London office. On the face of it, I had a great job. I just bought my first house. Everything was kind of going great. But my pain that I was experiencing was just getting worse and worse. And it wasn't cyclical, it was all the time. So every day I would have constant pain from the moment I woke up pretty much until when I went to sleep. To be honest, I completely normalized that. I thought that that was just how it was, how it was meant to be, and just hadn't really questioned it in much more detail, even though my mum is a nurse, my sister is a doctor, I've worked in the NHS myself, arguably I should have probably known better, but also I never learned about this. I'd never been taught about it in school. I studied biomedical science, had never heard about it even through that degree. Really, it was about me sort of just realizing, and actually my partner, to be honest, which I think is important to mention, because I think a lot of times we sort of internalize a lot of this and we think that it's for us to kind of manage on our own. Support is so important for things like endometriosis or other women's health conditions, because actually it's not something that you should really have to deal with on your own. But at the end of the day, he was the one that was like, actually, like, this is enough now, like this can't continue. And so I ended up getting my diagnosis. What it's really taught me is that trial and error is super important. I think for something like endometriosis, what works for one person is going to be very different from someone else. So I think understanding and trying different things and not feeling the pressure of seeing or hearing someone else doing something and maybe it doesn't work for you. Actually, it's really important to kind of figure out what that is, because we're all different. Our bodies are all different. We all experience things differently. We will process different things, in a different way. I think trial and error, obviously from a health perspective, but also in life. And I think in my business, it's taught me a hell of a lot, because actually, you can try one thing, it might not work, but you learn from that, right? So for me, it's all about taking that learning experience. The second thing I think that's really important that I've learned is doing what works for you. So I think, again, figuring out what that is and trying to stay focused on that. So for me, what works for me now is I started running. I'm trying to eat, more healthily. I don't eat processed foods. I do still drink. Admittedly, I do love a wine, but I'm human. Do you know what I mean? Like, food is one of my biggest passions. And I think that for me, it's balance. Traveling as well is a big thing for me. And really, it kind of taught me that I need to just actually enjoy myself and my life. I think a condition like endometriosis can completely take over everything. It can become your everything. It almost can become your identity. And I feel like I personally felt like that happened to me. And I've met a lot of people that felt the same. So I think remembering that actually, your health is part of you. Your health should be there to serve you. Your health doesn't define you. And actually finding ways to almost take that pressure off, for me, has been honestly life-changing. I have less pain now than I ever have. And it's not perfect. I still do have, pain and symptoms, but from where I was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's like night and day. And then finally, you don't ask, you don't get. I did go to the doctors for many years, was always kind of dismissed. It's really important to advocate for yourself and to ask for what you want, whether that's asking for a referral to a specialist, asking to be put on a different medication, asking to have surgery, whatever that might be. Educate yourself. Knowledge is power. You need to know what is out there. And yes, you might not be a medical doctor or a nurse or have had that training, but now more than ever, we have information and tools available to us as patients that allow us to be in control of our health. And so I would really encourage anyone who is maybe struggling with pain or any other kind of symptoms or a condition, that if you feel like you want something, for example, I asked for pelvic floor physio, I asked for acupuncture. There's a lot of things that you may not know are even available in your health system. And obviously this varies per country. And I completely recognize that being in the UK, yes, the NHS isn't perfect, but actually it's incredible and you can get a lot of support. But also it may not be through your traditional health system. It may be through a nutritionist. There may be other things. So again, it's really just about like asking for different things, asking people who you know who have those similar experiences, and just being really open as well to what that might be, because it may be that something that you might think is a bit, not really sure about, that could actually be the thing that really helps you. So being open-minded, I think is really important. And all of this again has helped me tremendously in my businesses as well.
Wow. You've like touched a lot of the points I was going to ask you, because like this is
Sorry.
no, this is awesome. Like this is very valuable information. But I do have a question. Let's say for someone who doesn't know how to advocate for themselves when they're going to get a checkup, like what advice would you have for that person? Like they're experiencing the pain, but they're not sure if they're going to be listened to. Like how can they prepare ahead of the doctor's visit?
So I think recording your symptoms is really important. So a lot of times, especially again, I'm using endometriosis as an example. There's a lot of misconceptions. People think it's just pain around your period. And that is the case, right? For some, but it's a very heterogeneous condition. So it manifests very differently for different people. So making a log and keeping track, whether that's through an app, whether that's through just notes in your phone or in a notepad, keep notes of like when it's happening. Are there any things that are triggering it? Are there things that are potentially happening before or after or during, whatever it might be, something, even if it doesn't feel relevant, keep track of those things, because that is data. And that data will help your healthcare professional, your doctor, your nurse to actually help you with managing your condition. So I think making sure that you have anything which you think might be relevant, preparing any questions ahead of time. So a lot of times you're in the appointment, it goes very quickly. It's quite a high stress situation. It can be very emotional. You'll forget to ask all the things that you want to ask. And then you'll walk out the door and be like, I wish I asked X, Y, Z. So preparing any questions that you might have, if you can take someone with you, if you feel like you need to help there from like a support perspective, but also to help with those questions, because I've usually come out of hospital appointments crying, both through relief and through like frustration. So I think having someone also with you if you can, but yeah, just writing down those questions or having someone be there to ask them for you. And doing your research, I think, is really important. I think we, in my opinion, rely too much on healthcare professionals in the healthcare system to be responsible for our own bodies and our own health. And at the end of the day, I think we need to take back that autonomy, and we are the people that are responsible for our health. And yes, there are things that are happening, and yes, there are things like endometriosis, and there are things that happen that may not necessarily be causative or as a result of your actions. But I know for a fact that me being chronically stressed is not a coincidence, and that is a correlation between the pain that I have. So I think it's also about like understanding as much as you can, reading online. There are so many free resources now that you can get. Yes, you need to take some of it with a pinch of salt, because you can't listen to everything. But I think understanding as much as you can so that you're also informed in the conversations that you're having. I'm a big advocate for shared decision making. So your doctor will give you advice and they are the expert and they are the healthcare professional, but that should be a shared decision. So if you're being told something that you don't feel comfortable about as well, that's okay to feel that you don't have to do that. So it's okay to say no. It's okay to ask questions. If you don't understand something, say that you don't understand something. Like this is what they're there for, and they're humans too. So I think just trying to go in prepared so that you're maximizing that time that you have with them, and knowing that you may not come out with exactly what you want to hear, but at least you're one step closer to hopefully a positive outcome.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really useful information. Okay, so let's talk a bit about your company. What is it about? How did you start it?
I love that question. So Rela Health is actually a bit of an evolution from my first business, which was this independent life. So I actually started after I got diagnosed with endometriosis. I quit my job. I traveled for a little bit and I thought, screw this, I'm gonna, change the world. So in all seriousness, I actually, through my diagnosis of endometriosis, became really inspired by women's health. So kind of similar, I think, to your journey as well. And I think a lot of people in women's health, it's often led, or the catalyst is often some sort of personal experience. So I think I'd worked in healthcare for a long time, working with big pharma brands, launching global products, doing all this fancy stuff, traveling the world. But actually, when I was diagnosed with endometriosis, I almost went down this rabbit hole of realizing that why is it that, I've worked on all of these different brands and all of these different products. Like Ozempic was one of the first brands I ever worked on when it was for type 2 diabetes, but now that's obviously something that's very well known. A lot of different things across oncology, like all different areas. I'd never worked on a women's health brand, never worked on a women's health product. And I just was really shocked, but also kind of, it lit a fire inside me to kind of actually understand why that is. And so what I really started doing in the first place, which then evolved into what I'm doing now, is going into workplaces and actually talking to people to almost have the conversation that we just had. So educating people on how to advocate for themselves, how to navigate the system, how to get a diagnosis, because I'm not a healthcare professional, right? But actually sort of helping people to connect the dots, helping to understand what options are available for them. So I started a support group. I hosted a lot of events. I hosted an international conference where I brought together patients, researchers, startups, policymakers, all different people in the space to kind of really look at that cross-sectional stakeholder approach to, in my opinion, like changing the future of women's health and actually getting to a stage where we don't have to be having these conversations about the need for advocacy and innovation and research and all of these things. I had my own podcast. I did, spoke in Parliament as part of the Women's Health Inquiry. So did a lot around kind of education, advocacy, awareness. But I started to get really frustrated, in full transparency, around the focus on the problem, which I think some people, it can be a controversial opinion, but I actually think that in any part of life, if we only focus on the problem, and what's to say, I'm terrible with sayings, but like where you water the grass is greener kind of thing. Like essentially, if you're only focusing on that thing, that's what's gonna, breed and come, So for me, I started actually saying, well, what if we flip that and started looking at the solution? And so I started working for Imperial College London, which your listeners may or may not have heard of. It's one of the leading academic institutions in the world, based in London, where I live. And I joined them as their first and still only in 2025 women's health expert in residence. So they have a kind of entrepreneurship enterprise lab where they have startups, students, alumni that basically are looking to either spin out their research or something that they've created, a device, an app. I mean, it could be anything. And they have a pool of experts that they go to get support. So I started, doing that because I knew that there was people in their community that were working on women's health brands because they had come to me outside of Imperial, and I was like, you've got an opportunity here. Why don't you bring me in? So I started doing that, and long story short, I just loved it. I really loved the ability to take that experience that I had from big pharma and working in the healthcare system for a long time, and combining it with what I'd been doing for a few years around that kind of grassroots education, patient advocacy and awareness and impact, and almost combining the two to realize that there is nuance in women's health for a lot of reasons. And actually, we can't be tackling it the same as, an ophthalmology product or an oncology product. Yes, there's overlap. Yes, there's similarities, but actually there is some nuance here, as well as companies that were kind of med tech or health tech that weren't necessarily a women's health product, in quotes. So it wasn't, and again, this is a whole other conversation around women's health isn't just gynecological health, but for the purposes of this conversation, also a lot of people were coming to me and saying, well, we've actually noticed that a lot of our audience are women. They didn't go into that realizing that, but they've noticed that as part of their development, and they realized that they haven't been considering like women just as part of their audience. So that's kind of where it started, and I just loved it. And so I decided to actually launch my consultancy, and kind of pivot and rebrand and relaunch into Rela Health, which is what I'm doing now. And so what I'm really doing is working with predominantly women's health innovators and brands to essentially bring their research or their idea to reality. So mostly early stage, but also some at a later stage. I still also work with bigger companies as well, but I'm super passionate about early stage innovation because I think there's so many incredible ideas that just die and don't actually get to where they need to be. They don't come to fruition. They're not able to create the impact that they were created to do, because they lack that support, whether that's because they're an academic or they're a clinician. They've just not, that's not their expertise, right? In the same way that I'm not a doctor, I'm not I'm not an academic or a scientist. So for me, that's really where I'm kind of trying to come in and provide that very nuanced kind of support so that people can actually really take what they're doing and get it into the hands or into the lives of the people that are ultimately looking to be helped.
Okay, that's really incredible work, and it's really
Thank you.
interesting to see that like you're still the only person in 2025 still working on this at Imperial College. Like, who doesn't know Imperial College London? It's like, oh my gosh.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's other like departments, and they do women's health work, but in their specific entrepreneurship arm and support, yeah, to my knowledge, as of today, I'm not aware of anyone else. That's what they've told me, at least. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be more hopefully in future, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed. I think there's a growing number of women interested in building a femtech these days. So fingers crossed. Yeah. So I'm sorry, like I am mind blown by all this. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit more about endometriosis itself, because growing up, I didn't even know that that was a thing. And the more I learn about it, the more scary it is, because I recently like learned that endometriosis can even like get like transfer into the person's leg or the lungs or the brain. And I'm like, this this is a big problem. So let's say for somebody who doesn't even know what endometriosis is, how would you describe because I understand that endometriosis can present as different things depending on the woman. So how was it like for you specifically, and you already like touched on the process for your diagnosis? Like, could you just talk about how your experience has been again?
Yeah. So for me personally, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not gonna give medical advice or anything like that. But so my personal experience was that I was on the coil as well, which was as like a contraceptive, but also it's used as a form of treatment actually. Either way, the way that it presented for me was that I just had pain all the time. So I would have chronic pain in my kind of abdomen, quite often my lower back. I would be chronically, and still now usually, I'm bloated like basically all the time. So endobelly, which you may have heard of, is where like people have asked me if I'm pregnant multiple times. I am not pregnant. I have never been pregnant. Hopefully in future. Yeah. So that was an interesting experience. And yeah, I think just obviously then as a result of that, having to go to work every day, pretend like everything's fine, go out for dinner with friends, just try and live my life and pretend like everything's fine. Obviously, from a fatigue standpoint, so fatigue is kind of the third main symptom that I had. So just like being very tired despite sleeping, a good amount of hours every night. So those were kind of the main things that presented for me. But obviously, like I said before, it can manifest very differently for different people. I think now my pain is significantly less, and it's taken me, I think, 4 years now to get to this point where I had surgery, but my symptoms came back. I've made a decision to probably not have surgery again. I'm very lucky, if you can call it that I didn't have any kind of deep infiltrating endometriosis. So sometimes it can go through your bowel, it can go through the wall of your uterus. It grows, like you said, outside of your uterus. I know a lot of people that have had really, just my heart breaks for them, like really terrible times. People that have had hysterectomies, like, it's pretty bad. But for me, I've made the decision and I've not had to go down that path. So I have chosen not to have surgery. I've stopped taking any contraceptives or any medication. I stopped taking painkillers because for me, I was popping them like candy. Like I was just so reliant on painkillers that I've now just, unless it's, sometimes a few days around my period, but I don't really have to take painkillers. And I'm just able to manage it a lot better through this new approach that I'm kind of, and I know it might sound a bit wooey, but for me, like I said, that's what's working for me. Not focusing so much on it, not being around that kind of like negative talk around it, because at the end of the day, it is a chronic condition and it is something that I'll probably have to live with for my whole life. So I don't want that to, be the focus. But it's really important that, yeah, I think people understand the I guess extent of their condition, because the longer you leave it, like the more it could potentially grow and, cause more damage. So making sure that you are understanding and getting your diagnosis if you can, which is really hard with endometriosis because as of today, you can only do that through surgery. So there's a lot of amazing innovations happening. And I'm sure, honestly, in the next couple of years, I'm very hopeful that there will be other tests that will be available. But also, we need to look at more research into the actual treatments and management of endometriosis. So yeah, I think there's a lot more work to be done. But yeah, hopefully that gives a little bit more insight. And
thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that and I agree. There's so much. I think it's not enough, but I'm happy that there's a lot of work going into like raising awareness on this topic, and I'm seeing that there are non-invasive ways to diagnose a person for endometriosis, which is really exciting. And hopefully I think they're testing it through period blood and some kind of way of probing something around it a little bit. I can't remember what the procedure was, but it's very interesting. Fingers crossed. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's talk a bit more about your work with founders. So you have your background you have worked with pharma companies, which is really exciting that you actually worked around the company that basically promoted Ozempic before Ozempic was now a cultural phenomenon. So like, what's one big observation you've made from your experience so far about the women's health ecosystem?
So an observation you mean that is different, or just from all of my experience, like that's the women's health ecosystem?
Yeah, what's unique to the women's health ecosystem that isn't talked about as much?
I mean, that's a very big question. I think one observation, or one of my main observations, I don't know if you could even call it an observation, to be honest, because I think it's almost like a wider issue with women's health just as a topic. It's not even about the ecosystem, it's just women and how women have been treated and are treated in society. I think there's a lot of like historic sexism and other, intersectional situations that have happened over generations that have led to where we are today. I think for me, the biggest thing about women's health is just that it's different from all the other areas that I've worked within healthcare is lack of funding. I think the lack of funding in women's health particularly has caused the knock-on effect that has led us to where we are now. Because if you kind of work backwards and think about it, without funding, you can't have research. So you can't actually have that kind of grasp understanding, that real foundational scientific, biological, cellular appreciation and understanding of what is actually happening. For example, with endometriosis, there has been a lot of amazing research, but no one can stand up today and tell you exactly, definitively, really, what causes endometriosis and why it manifests differently in so many different people. We don't know that. Because of that, we've not had as much innovation, because you can't create a solution if you don't understand the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like this ripple effect of, without having that funding, and actually you could go back even further, without prioritizing women's health, that actually, for me, I mean, we've prioritized a lot of other areas within healthcare, but we've never prioritized women's health, because a lot of these things, like endometriosis, have just been seen as like something that you just have to deal with. And it's just something that you get on with, and it's not something that requires research and understanding, because that's just how it is. So I think there's a real societal kind of like stigma, and the opinion of women's health and the understanding and just the recognition of the health of women, not just about reproductive and gynecological health, about a lot of other things that affect women, predominantly more, longer. I mean, there's a list of things that I could go on and talk about, but essentially that just hasn't been prioritized. So for me, I think that is a real unique thing in the healthcare system that we are playing catch up on now. And I think we're seeing some incredible progress. And I think over the last few years, we're really starting to see some momentum. I mean, even since I started working in the space, it's incredible to see how much has happened. The fact that I was, being part of a report and inquiry that was happening in UK Parliament, in UK government, like that's huge. That probably wouldn't have happened even 10 years ago. So I think we are making great progress, but actually coming back to, the funding issue, without that funding for both research, but also innovation. So startup founders often for women's health brands are women. If we look at the stats, which I'm sure you and maybe your listeners will have heard of, but at the moment, on average, it's about 2% of kind of venture capital funding, which is a big pot that goes into the growth of startups, goes towards women, 2%. So obviously, if you then extrapolate that and look at the numbers, it's not a surprise that we're not seeing that development and that generation of development in these innovations. So I think we need to change that. I think there are strides being made, but we have a long way to go when we talk about equality, particularly for women's health. And I think if that's something that we can change, I think that there's a lot of hope. But yeah, for me, I think the three things that I sort of have championed for many years now is like more interest. So people understanding women's health, like the need for all of this investment to actually make that change happen, because people need to be paid for their time. That's another big issue in women's health. the amount of free work that I've done, I talk about it openly because I actually don't think it's a good thing that we expect people to just do a lot of work for free in women's health. It's almost seen as a charity, like it's a kind of thing that people should do out of the goodness of their heart, as opposed to something that should be taken as seriously as XYZ condition. And so actually that real kind of like seeing it as also a commercial opportunity, right? Like this how we treat other areas in healthcare. And that's not a negative thing. That's actually a positive thing. And we should see it as a positive thing and use that as a way to kind of fuel further innovation and further research. But, to me, I see it as a circular economy in some ways. And then, ultimately innovation, just actually innovating and coming up with new diagnostics, new treatments, new ways of understanding things, new ways of researching, getting people involved, real kind of cross-functional, getting everybody under the same roof, like talking about things, collaboration, international, engagements that are actually moving things forward instead of just talking about all of the problems and how we need to make women's health better. I think that's one thing that in women's health, there's a lot of talk, but we need a significant amount more action. And there are some incredible people that are doing that. I mean, there are the people I've worked with, both as my clients and partners and people in the space. Like, it inspires me every single day. And I'm so grateful to work with such amazing people that have such passion and drive for actually creating change. And that, on a positive, I mean, that I've not seen that or had that in any other field that I've worked in. The community in women's health, the genuine nature of people, the real kind of honest, genuine desire to make a difference. I've never experienced that in anything else. And I think that for me, like, that's what gets me up every day. That's why I love what I do. I'm able to work with people that are also just like incredible, doing incredible things. And that just like drives me every day as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really exciting. And it's awesome that you're sharing a lot of this, because I think I agree with you that there's a lot of talking and not enough doing. But then, like you said, there isn't that much funding to even do the doings.
Exactly.
That really changes. These are very important conversations to have. There's some things I see around, let's say, like somebody who feels like femtech or women's health is just people pinkwashing, or I don't know what pinkwashing. I recently heard that it's like pinkwashing. So I'm like, what would you say to somebody who doesn't understand why women's health isn't a niche in healthcare, that it's supposed to be a standalone, it's its own thing? Because there's very specific things like you already mentioned, that there's very specific conditions that affect particularly women, like endometriosis and PCOS. So what would you have to say to somebody who doesn't understand why this is important?
So I think there's two parts to that, honestly. I think now, having worked in the space for a good few years, I think there's arguments for and against, and I actually can see both sides and in some ways agree with both sides. So on the one hand, yes, I agree with you. And as I've said, I think it's really important to have that unique category, whether it's femtech, whether it's, women's health focused tech, whatever, because of that. And I think because of, in some ways, you have to play the game, right? Excuse me. So if that's going to help you get access to maybe specific funding pots, grants, investors that maybe are specifically focused on that, that can be a great way of kind of defining yourself and aligning yourself with the right people. So I think when used appropriately, it makes sense. On the other hand, I can understand the argument and do agree with the fact that actually, why do we need a name for what is just part of health? It should just be something that comes within the umbrella of health, because yes, you do have men's health. But, with a lot of these things, we'll have like oncology, for example, is a good example. Cancer, medicine, diabetes can also come under endocrinology. But so I think we have like different categories within healthcare, in the same way that if you're using that, you have gynecological health and, or reproductive health or fertility, things like that. So I think it's hard to almost then say that, because when you're then looking at things like funding and things like that, you can actually negatively impact your ability to get funding or investment or people to get involved, because actually it's not just a women in quotes problem, it's a healthcare problem, if you see what I mean. I don't think there's a kind of one answer, and it's a very complex thing that is probably more than a 5-minute discussion. But I do think that there are a lot of people that think it's like a bit of a trend, and it's like a bit cool to kind of say that you're a femtech product, or, slap that on the website and say you care about women's health, when actually nothing you're doing has got anything to do with women's health. For me, it's just about being real and about having authenticity in what you're doing and having the data and the stats to back it up. Right? Like anything. So I think if people want to do that, I personally feel like people can see through the bullshit, excuse my French. People are going to understand and see and will know from whether it's looking at, people's pitch decks or understanding what they're doing. And you know what I mean? And I think that people who are doing that, I like to think, will not rise to the top and will not end up succeeding in what they're doing because they're not doing it in a genuine way. Whereas I think people that are talking about it in a genuine, this is embedded and is fundamental to what we're doing, that for me then becomes part of what you're doing, and it's part of your story, and it's part of what you're actually setting out to achieve with your mission and the vision of your company or your innovation and whatever you're doing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a complex topic, and I think it's something that, like anything, I feel like over time, people are starting to finally take women's health seriously. They're seeing it as a commercial opportunity as well. They're seeing the value that is there from a patient impact perspective, because there are so many unmet needs in women's health that haven't been addressed for so long. That actually, when you flip it, means there's a huge opportunity to create so much positive change and impact and innovation that hasn't been done before. Like, that's so exciting. So I think there is also that, right? People want to get on the bandwagon and kind of be a part of it and be like, yeah, I'm part of women's health, cool. But actually, I think the people that are going to be in it for the long haul and are going to really, do the do and create things that are going to be meaningful are not the ones that are just going to be saying, yeah, we're women's health, just to like be cool. And I'm sure there are people who will do that and it will maybe help them, and credit to them. But given that there's already a lack of support out there for women's health founders and companies, I would like to think that the ones that are doing it genuinely are going to be the ones that hopefully get the support that they need.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for your answer. So for my next question is around being able to combine, like from the startups you've been able to support so far, what observation have you seen so far with combining the patient perspective with being able to build something that can actually scale? Because I think that's another thing with building in health. I think it's not just Femtech or women's health, like in health in general, building something that can actually like scale, because it's one thing for it to be a very important problem you're solving, but how do you scale this thing? So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So I think for me, like, that's one thing that I think differentiates me as well from a lot of like, consultants, agencies and things like that. I have lived experience of being a patient for a women's health condition that is very common, but very underdiagnosed and has, not the best outcomes. So I think for me, I've seen firsthand and I've worked with a lot of people that have a similar experience. They've had their own experience and that's led them to doing it. And I think that's really great from a founder's perspective because they have that kind of real experience, so to speak. Or potentially they're a healthcare professional or have experienced it in some other way, but they have that kind of relationship or that experience that has really been the catalyst to them doing that. So for example, I've worked with like someone who is a midwife and they have created a solution to kind of support around something to do with childbirth, essentially. So, they haven't necessarily experienced themselves, but they've seen that time and time and again through their clinical practice. So I think whatever perspective that is, I think taking that and making sure that you're combining it with the commercial viability of that. So again, like what I said before, having a great idea, that's cool. Having a great idea, that might be the best thing in the world for a patient. You might not actually be able to commercially scale it if you don't have anyone to pay for it, if you haven't got your unit economics and you don't understand or know like who's going to pay for it, how are you going to manufacture it if it's a device, how are you going to pay for all of the trials that you're going to do, so like clinical trials is something that you want to do, safety, your regulatory, legal, all of these different things that you have to do for a healthcare product that you don't have to do for launching a pair of trainers, for example, is something that you need to bake in from the beginning. So I think for me, it's something that's one part of it. I think another really important part is kind of user research and stakeholder research. So yes, the patient is fundamental. And I really truly believe in a patient-centric approach because at the end of the day, that's the person that you're impacting. If you're not helping them and you're not actually creating a change for them, they're not going to repeat using that thing, or they're not, you know what I mean? And again, it's hard to make it generic because obviously every product and service is different, but for the purposes of this conversation, that's really important. But also then you need to look at the other stakeholders. So again, in healthcare, it's a little bit different, whereby actually healthcare professionals are often people that you really need to bake into that because they're the ones who are likely going to be prescribing it. Or maybe it's a nurse, or maybe it's another kind of professional that might be. So I think it's really understanding who are the people that are actually going to be involved, as well as that patient perspective, and what does that journey really look like? So as a patient, as a customer, that's different actually often in healthcare. So you might have things where actually you're a B2C product and you're selling, I don't know, for example, like tampons or pads or something that's a product that you're selling to a consumer. That's a little bit different because you're going directly to that person, to that patient, so to speak. And that's a little bit different because it's a bit less medical. When you're talking about healthcare professional kind of led approach and communications, you have to make sure that their journey and their experience is actually completely related to that patient experience, because you also have to think about their day-to-day. How do you fit in their workflow? How do you fit in their day-to-day job, process and life and all of those other things, as well as then the healthcare system that they're part of, because they can't just be like, hi, I want to prescribe this thing. They have to get approval from their hospital trust, their healthcare system. It depends on the market that you're in. It depends on so many different things. So I think having that patient centricity is really important, but it's really, really fundamental that people are building out that full 360 understanding and that journey of how people interact with whatever your product and service is. It's almost like putting that at the center and really understanding by having focus groups, doing market research, having the conversations where you're asking difficult questions. You want to actually be making sure that you are solving a genuine problem and you're not force fitting or retrofitting something that you think is a great idea, but actually in reality, in the healthcare system that you're going into, that may not be the case. So I think when we're talking about scaling, we're talking about commercialization, it's so, so important to make sure that people are really thinking about from the beginning, okay, in an ideal world, who am I going to be selling this to? Who's going to be paying for it? How is it going to be, the repeat situation, if there's any kind of repeat, aspect to it? How are we going to understand feedback from them? How are we going to make sure that we're learning and we're iterating as we scale, because things are going to change. What you maybe did when you were a team of 2 is going to be different when you're a team of 20 or 200. So I think it's really asking questions, listening, testing as much as you can. Trial and error, like I said at the beginning, for me is like, honestly, whether it's your health, whether it's your business, whether it's relationships, whatever, ask the difficult questions. You don't ask, you don't get. Trial and error with everything that you're doing and being open-minded, because what you might think is what you're going to do is never going to be what you set out. You know what I mean? Like, there's always going to be that evolution, and that's exciting. That's great, because it means that you're actually listening and you're iterating. It's great to have a strategy and a plan, and that's really, really important. And that's what I work with founders to do, is putting together both strategic plans, marketing plans, and really looking at, okay, what are our objectives? How are we going to make that happen? What are the actual, assets, whether it's social media materials or whether it's, hosting an event or being, whatever it might be, like actually, what does that look like, and how can we involve patients so that we're having that as part of it, but also not leaving out the people that are also really fundamental and helping them be part of that journey as well. Because at the end of the day, the more people you have on board, the easier it's going to be to actually bring your idea to fruition. It's never going to be one person. It's really about galvanizing all of the people that are going to be a part of whatever it is that you're trying to create.
Thank you so much. That gave me a lot to think about.
That's some free advice for you right there.
Yeah, because it's like when you said like not building something and trying to force fit it into the markets, like that really like struck me. And because it's very easy to like want to build something, because personally when I like building out Asala, I started building out for myself, and then I noticed that like not a lot of people have the same interest as me. So it's been a lot of iterating and adjusting to like understand like this is what
Amazing. And that's
Yeah.
great. That's what I mean. If you ask anyone in the world, any company, look at any company, what they started out, honestly, my go-to for everything is done is better than perfect as well. Like what you start off doing, you could spend weeks, months. Some people spend years trying to perfect something without ever speaking to a potential customer or someone's going to get involved with their products. I think doing what you've done, and exactly as you've said, is so, so important. And the earlier you can do that, the better, because then you know what you're working with, right? Actually, this might be what I thought. Maybe it's not different. It's like the same thing in research. You have a hypothesis, you test it. It's just applying that same logic in business and really knowing that is absolutely at the core to make sure that when you put it out into the world, that it really does resonate. So that's great. That's great to hear.
Thank you. Okay. So you already mentioned this before, that you've given a talk at Parliament. You've also been mentioned on Women of Wearables for being one of the top 200 leaders in femtech, which is really exciting. Congratulations. What stands out to you in the current state of the femtech industry that makes you feel like, okay, people are starting to pay attention to women's health now?
So I think a lot of things. I mean, like I said, I think we're finally starting to hear it being talked about. The fact that, the UK Parliament was even running a women's health inquiry to actually look into, understand the situation in women's health and, the reality of what's happening, not just from a patient perspective, but from an overall healthcare perspective, right? And looking at the system, really talking about systemic change, how we can actually go about doing things to change what is currently happening. That for me is huge. That is progress. That's not something that we've really ever seen before. And so that in itself, I think, is huge. But also things like, very recently we heard that Bill Gates and, these huge players are now putting up, a lot of money to actually help people who are working in this space. And it's not just, a nice to have. It's not just a charity, whatever. They're doing it because they're finally seeing and listening to what people have been saying for many, many years, that actually there's an opportunity here, but also there is so much that needs to be done in this space that really it's, get on board. Like, it's exciting, right? Like, it's new. I mean, it's not new, but you know what I mean? Like, it's an emerging space which has this excitement because there's so much opportunity out there. I really, really believe that. And I see that as a positive. I know that it can be seen and maybe might sound a bit like, oh, you're saying that women's health is, do you know what I mean? But you know what I mean? Like, actually, we're finally having people listen to the problems that we've been talking about, whether it's endometriosis and actually making it so that it's not going to be another me and it's going to take people 10 years living in chronic pain and just dealing with it. Like, that to me is exciting. That is an opportunity to actually change that reality for millions and millions of people around the world. So that for me is really exciting. And I think the fact that we're having these kind of big things, we're hearing it in, US government as well. We're hearing it all around the world that actually women's health, various initiatives are happening, whether it's grant funding pots, like there's a lot more that we need to do. But I think it's great that we're seeing that. I think as well, like in the UK specifically, I was an advisor for Accelerating Femtech, which again was one of the first, or is one of the first, and currently only actually in the UK, maybe even to be honest, in the world of its kind, that is really looking at a women's health dedicated program that is helping startups that are doing something in women's health. Again, we've not really seen that before, but we're finally seeing things like that being funded because people are understanding that that's what's needed to actually drive that change in the healthcare system and for ultimately our economy and our society at large all around the world. So I think the fact that we're finally seeing these kind of dedicated programs, dedicated funding, big players getting involved, people talking about it, all the way up to like governments around the world, I think that is, I mean, if that's not a sign, I don't really know what is. What's gonna, change and happen in future, we'll see. I think there's still a huge gap in terms of like the private sector of VC funding and all of that kind of stuff. But also I think what's important to mention that a lot of people don't think about or talk about is that when you think about investing, and I one day would love to be able to be an investor myself. I'm learning about it at the moment. I do not have the capital today. I'm an open book, as I told you at the beginning. I would love to be writing checks all over the place. I do not yet, but one day I will. And I really believe that that is also another way of like putting it back into the system, paying it forward, making sure that I'm able to take my experience and my learnings and help people who are, hopefully going to be doing even more amazing, great things. But actually investment is also a risk. It's a huge risk. So why would you do something that you've not seen that many examples of it going well, right? Whereas in a lot of other industries, you have these unicorns, these hugely successful companies, whether that's privately funded, whether it's, IPOing and going on the public stock exchange. We've not actually seen that many examples in women's health. So I think, again, over time, we'll start seeing more of that. And I think that in itself, it's going to become a ripple effect. It's going to be that compounding effect of the more success that happens, the more innovation, the more results, the more impact is going to continue to fuel the space. So I think we're in a super exciting time. And I do think that, the industry is paying attention. I just want to make sure that also we're not getting caught up in just it being a trend and a cool thing. We still need to make sure that we're really grounding it in what are the unmet needs. We're putting patients at the center, all of those things that we've talked about. But yeah, I think it's really great to see that we are finally seeing some really big commitments because money talks at the end of the day, right? So that's what's gonna move things, and people getting paid for their time who are working in this space actually being able to involve women in a lot of these things, because a lot of times women weren't even involved in clinical trials for a lot of the products that are out there. You know what I mean? So in all different sectors and all different intersections across healthcare, I think women are finally also being incorporated into that and listened and being put at the center. So I think, yeah, we've got a long way to go. We're definitely not there, but I'm really confident that we're at a really exciting time and there's just so much potential. I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, I agree. It is super exciting. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. And I have another question for you, but this time it's more about AI because I mean everybody's talking about AI. From your perspective so far, what do you think AI is how do you think it's going to influence the femtech industry?
That's a big question. You've hit me with a lot of big questions. I'll admit, I'm upskilling a lot in AI. It's like a running joke between my partner and I. I think that AI is amazing. I think like anything, any innovation, it's kind of like when people invented the internet or computers, everyone was like freaking out about it. But like at the end of the day, look at the progress that's been made with it. Yes, it's not perfect, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think on the one hand, I think it's great. And I think it's amazing that actually AI is going to help to hopefully, and I think we're even seeing this already, actually for me, it's all about impact, right? Like actually create more impact, because there are things that maybe take a lot of human time or things that we don't need to spend loads of time doing. Time is money. So when we're thinking about it in, startup world, like you have to be lean, you've got a lot of things that are happening. If we can actually use AI in a way that's going to allow teams to do more with less, which really is in women's health absolutely critical, and that is the reality. They're not getting the same funding. So I think that is only a benefit, that we're going to be able to hopefully see people getting further along the process to demonstrate what they're doing, to then get more support. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that it will actually help to fuel a lot of teams that maybe wouldn't have been able to succeed in that way because they didn't have that access. So I think it's a great thing. On the other hand, I do think that there are a lot of people just slapping on a pitch deck or saying that they're doing an AI tool or whatever. And that just, is fine, I guess. But it's kind of the same with slapping women's health on your pitch deck or saying that you're a women's health product. I think just being real about it and saying about like, what are you actually doing? How is that actually making an impact? Is there any kind of IP that you have in your AI? Like what's unique about it? Or you know what I mean? Instead of it just being like, we're an AI tool that uses this. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think it's going to become something that is almost expected, right? Like a lot of these things, you have recommendations, for example, like I'm sure like a lot of apps will have recommendations, or there are sort of functionalities that you can use. I think if it makes it easier, or, you can do that in a more streamlined way, or on the back end, it's making, if it's making things more efficient, I do think that is a positive thing. But I think we need to make sure that we're not forgetting that human layer, and that we're also not just chucking out and churning out a bunch of, social media and communications that is all only generated by, you know what I mean? And like taking it to an extreme where everything is AI, and then it's kind of like, well, we are still humans, right, at the end of the day, and we still need to be thinking about it from a human impact perspective, in my opinion. So obviously there's a lot of other things that go into that, but I think it's a really exciting time. And also things even like looking at the next stage, like quantum computing, and looking at what that's doing. I mean, it's super exciting, and the potential impact of that is great. And, I think it's really amazing to see that the innovation and what's happening. I think how that's going to impact women's health, we'll see. But I think as long as it's being dealt with and managed in the same way that we should for anything in women's health, i.e. we're not just like, doing it for the sake of it, or doing it because we think it's going to help us get to the next stage. Yes, it's about playing the game, right? Like I think a lot of things, and that maybe that if you incorporate that, yes, that might be a benefit. But I think it has to have intention. With anything, you just have to have an intention to be doing something genuinely, instead of just saying it because you think it's what you should be saying. That's just my rule of thumb in life. Just saying something means nothing. It's really your actions behind it and why you're doing it. That's what's most important. I think, again, that's what will help the people shine through that are doing things and using it in a smart way to ultimately fuel what they're doing, instead of just using it as something to kind of sound a bit cool or be a bit on trend, because that's just not going to fly in the long term.
That makes sense. Okay, so we are headed towards the end of the podcast. So this has been very, very insightful. So I have around 3 questions left to ask. So for a founder who's listening to this podcast and they're just starting out, what's one piece of advice that you wish you knew, or generally founders should know when they're starting out from the beginning?
Done is better than perfect. I know I already said it, but I'm going to say it again. The amount of time that I spend like doing the website and like rewriting the website or doing a LinkedIn post, doing a whole day writing a LinkedIn post, like just do it. Like, because you can always iterate, you can always edit it, and it's never going to be perfect. And what even is perfect? Right? Like, I think we need to just get out of our heads sometimes. And I still have to tell myself this all the time. It's especially if you're the kind of person, which a lot of founders are, where it's like your baby and you want it to be perfect, and you know, there's so much in it, and your identity is, you know, there's so much that goes into that. But actually, just getting it out there, same as what we were talking about with your products. You just have to get it out there, because until you get it out there and you put it out into the world, it's just an idea in your head. It's not real. So I think just done is better than perfect. Just get it out there and know and trust that you will be able to iterate and you will learn and you will grow and you will pivot from what you're doing, but just kind of enjoying the ride. I think for me, like, there will be times where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to give up. Anyone who tells you that they've never had a day like that is probably lying, because again, I think most founders that I've met, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. And there's a lot of highs, but there's also a lot of lows. So I think just sticking with it and just do it. Like, I think a lot of things as well, I sort of was like, oh, I'm not sure if I can do that. Oh, I'm not sure if I, you know, should, whatever, just do it. And you will know whether that's the right thing that you should be doing by the reactions that you get or by the feedback that you get. You're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of people ignoring your emails. You're going to get a lot of people, you know, who have said they're going to do one thing and they don't follow through, you know, people who aren't true to their word. But that's just life. And I think actually just learn from it, like grow from it. Don't take things too personally, and just try and remember your why you're doing it. Focus on the impact that you're trying to make. Just remind yourself why you wanting to do this. But yeah, just do it. I think do it, and done is better than perfect. I think those are my. I'm going to say it's one, but it's kind of two. But it's probably like five, but we'll say it's one.
I needed all five.
Okay.
When you said that some days you feel like, why are you even doing this? Was literally me yesterday, because I was like, why bother? Yeah, some days are harder than others. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was really, really, really solid advice. All right, so down to two questions. So what would you tell 15-year-old Rebekah?
15-year-old Rebekah. I looked very different when I was 15. I was very different when I was 15. I was very, very different when I was younger. I had no confidence, was pretty shy, which a lot of people like find very hard to believe now. A lot more. I still would class myself as introverted, but was very introverted. I was a dancer. Like, I danced my whole life. Like, I did ballet and various other things. But apart from that, really, I would never be something like, I hated public speaking. It would give me like the worst anxiety, you know, wasn't very good at exams and like, you know, all that kind of stuff. Applied to go to medical school and got rejected, like, and all that. So
Same.
I don't know, like, yeah, it's been a journey, but I don't know. I think just like, don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think that's what I would say to myself, because actually I think over the years, you know, whether it's, you know, expectations of your parents, your peers, like, at jobs, so many times I think back, like, from 15, because like I started working when I was super young. I was a cleaner, and then I worked in retail and like did a bunch of different things. Like, I've had a million different jobs over the years, but to not put too much pressure on, you know, success, whatever that looks like, and actually people pleasing and doing things because you think it's going to make someone else happy. I spent so many years of my life, particularly I think from it, like being a teenager, just doing what I thought I should be doing and not actually doing what I wanted to be doing. So I think that, yeah, I would tell 15-year-old Rebekah to just like block out the noise, try not to stress about like things that you can't control, you know, as a control freak that I am. Like, there's only so much you can do, right? You can't change people. You know, I think as you're a teenager and there's a lot of stuff going on and emotions are running high in relationships, and, you know, like that's okay. Yeah, I think not putting too much pressure on what the future holds as well. Because what I've learned now is that, like, I actually don't even know. I didn't know that if you asked me this time last year, would you have a new business that's consulting and doing what we're doing now and doing this book? I would have been like, no, you know, I thought I knew what I was doing. And so now I'm super open, and I love that, because actually it's exciting. And it's like, well, I don't know what's around the corner, and I don't have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, which you're told to do at school, right? Like, oh, you need to make sure that you're planning out your career and that you decide on what you want to do now for the rest of your life as a 50. You know what I mean? Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think just taking all of that pressure off that comes at you from a lot of different places, often with love, right? Like people try and, I do genuinely believe that, but I think I took a lot of that probably to heart, and it probably impacted me more than I probably care to admit. So yeah, I think that would be my main piece of advice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The reason why I usually ask for 15 is because it's like, it wasn't until recently I learned that like the education system in different countries differs a lot, because around 15 in Nigeria, you're already started like figuring out what you're going to do when you're in uni. So I'm like, I like asking this question to like see how people have seen like, this is where they thought their life was going to go and this is where they are at right now. So it's very nice like getting this perspective from different women and seeing how so much has changed over time.
Yeah. Yes, a lot. Yeah, a lot of things that have happened in my life I never thought would happen in a good way.
Awesome. All right. So final question. What's the best place to learn more about you, about Rela Health, and everything else that you're doing?
Yeah, so probably my LinkedIn. So Rebekah Lloyd, with my slightly different spelling to usual, Rebekah Lloyd, like the bank. I'm not affiliated or a member. If I was the heir of the Lloyds, whatever, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, Rebekah Lloyd, LinkedIn, and then just email me. My door, email, house is always open. You can ask a lot of people. People often pop round for a cup of tea or a wine, depending on the day. So yeah, Rebekah at Rela Health, Rela Health, HEALTH.co, not .com, .co. I do have an Instagram. Obviously, I don't really use it as much anymore, but you can check me out. I'm also there, Rela Health. But yeah, I mean, my website as well, relahealth.co. It's all Rela Health. So just Google Rela Health and you'll find it. But yeah, I'm always really happy to chat to anyone. But yeah, on LinkedIn, I do kind of share a bit about my journey, like entrepreneurship, the work that I do in the space. And on my website, I've got a bit more about like the work that I do, the kind of ways that I support. But yeah, I'm always really happy to chat to anyone, genuinely, because I know, people are at different stages, figuring out what's happening. And also from a collaboration standpoint, I work and collaborate and partner with a lot of different people. So whether it's client, partner, like I'm loving just collaborating and meeting so many people in the space and just getting involved and just seeing how I can help and help move things forward. So yeah, get in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I will leave the links to all of those in the description and in the show notes. So for anyone who wants to connect with Rebekah, thank you so much, Rebekah. It's been amazing having you on the podcast and learning so much about you and Rela Health and all the work you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Honestly, it's been highlight of my day. So thank you so much. Yeah, I think just what you're doing is amazing. I think it's amazing that you're creating a space to kind of talk about these things that, a lot of times people don't want to get into the nitty-gritty and get under the hood of the car, so to speak. So yeah, I'm really grateful and thank you for your amazing questions and your amazing conversation, and just everything you're doing is amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. And excited to see what your future holds as well.
We'll see.
Your future is bright.
I needed to hear that. Thank you. I'll stop the recording now.
Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Blush and Bloom. I'm so glad you joined me for this conversation. If you found it helpful, please share this episode with a friend or someone who might need it. Let's keep talking about women's health and working towards better outcomes for all of us. You can find more episodes and resources at www.asale.tech and check out our app at www.asale.health. And you can follow us for more updates on Instagram at asale.tech. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and bye-bye.